Matt Miller, welcome back to Tuscaloosa. I hope you're doing well, man.
Doing great, guys. Good to talk to you again.
Absolutely, and looking forward. Now we saw on your Twitter account instantly that you said better country music and beer scout. So we worked in Song of the South. What would you grade Song of the South by the group Alabama with? I mean, is that an A, B?
That's like a Minkah Fitzpatrick type song, man. That's pretty dang good on my scale, yeah.
Okay. All right, so first round material, no doubt.
No doubt. Top 5, top 10 pick. Yep.
All right, so let's go to Mika Fitzpatrick. Let me ask you, when you look at him, what do you see from your perspective?
I see one of the best football players in the class, and I think, you have a guy who is a very, very good athlete. He has speed. He's tough. He's position versatile. He could play or has played outside corner, slot, safety. There were times it was like he was an outside linebacker in nickel coverage. So he's really able to match up a lot of different ways. Awesome character, hard worker. His football instincts are, I think, the best in the class, just in terms of a guy who just gets it when you're actually watching him play. So I'm a big fan of his. I think the comparison I tried to make, and I don't think they'll let me do this when it's all said and done, was if you could just mix Jalen Ramsey and Jamal Adams, you would have Minkah Fitzpatrick. Just that type of guy, that type of leader, the type of worker. So I'm a huge fan of his, as you can tell.
What does he need to do next week at the NFL Combine?
Not get hurt. That's about it. I mean, he's a lot like Jamal Adams was last year, really, truly, to where it's just the guy who you just know exactly what he is. Just he's as solid as they come. There might be some people who overthink it a little bit, but the run on quarterbacks might mean that he's not going to be a top 6 pick like Jamal Adams was, but he's going to go very, very early regardless. I mean, he could go number 3 to the Colts, number 4 to the Browns, and depending on what happens with these quarterbacks, he could go 5 to the Broncos, 7 to the Buccaneers. There's a lot of different spots that he could go in the top 10. So I think the big thing as far as how could he make money, I think he's going to run in the high 4.3s. That would be fantastic. The one thing that he can't control is going to be arm length, and that's probably the thing that makes him a safety for a lot of people and not a corner, is I don't think at 6 feet tall he's going to come in with super long arms.
Let me ask you about Calvin Ridley, the next Alabama guy that you've got on the board there at BleacherReport.com as a highly ranked player. Calvin Ridley coming out of the University of Alabama, maybe not as much production as you would expect from a number 1 wide receiver in this draft, but still enough to grab your attention in many of those NFL teams.
Yeah, he's the best route runner in the draft, and I think when you talk about production, you can't put that on him, right? I mean, just no disrespect to Jalen Hurts. He's a great college quarterback, won a ton of ball games, but he's just not really opening up the passing game for a guy like Calvin Ridley to excel. Look at what James Washington's getting at Oklahoma State. Look at what Calvin Ridley's getting at Alabama. They're asked to do 2 completely different things. So I love Ridley. I think he has speed. He is a nice route runner. His footwork is absolutely on point. Body control is great. He's a natural hands catcher who's able to make things happen away from his frame. As far as questions go with him, he's 23 years old. That's something that some people will be, he's a little bit older, so he was able to beat up on these 19, 20-year-old kids. I don't put a lot of stock into that. And then just the matter of size. He's not the big hulking receiver that you normally see go number 1 as the top receiver off the board. He's 6'1", he's probably about $190. But I do think he's going to run well, and his agility and route running skills should keep him in the top. I think he'll be the first receiver off the board, and he should be a top 20 pick.
Matt, I get in big trouble here with the local audience when I say that Jalen Hurts is not an NFL quarterback. I mean, I get all these negative tweets. You're a professional. Let me ask you, what does Jalen need to do, or would you think that he would need to switch position to make it a Sunday afternoon?
Just based on what I've seen through the last 2 years, he's going to have to switch positions. And that's not to say he can't learn some things over the next 2 years, that his game can't change. But just where he's at right now, I would actually think that would be pretty obvious. I would think Alabama fans would be all on the Tua train right now of this is the guy who might be, a first-round pick in a couple of years if he can, live up to the expectation and the hype and how well he played in the second half of the national championship game. I think with Hurts, just, whether it's a move to, he's not really built like a receiver. So is there a move to safety? Is there a move to running back? I mean, it's just, he's not the natural passer. He just doesn't have the instincts and the accuracy that you expect from a quarterback.
Well, but see, here's the thing. It's like one of these things in Tuscaloosa. You're either a Tua fan or a Jalen fan. You cannot be both. It's illegal in Tuscaloosa to do that.
I'm a Texas fan, and I remember the Chris Sims Major Applewhite days of you had to be one or the other. I was a Major Applewhite fan. Now I work with Chris Sims. So it's kind of funny how the world works, but I've been there. I get it.
All right, so let me ask you, when you look at playing for the University of Alabama under this system, we like to call it the 33rd franchise in the NFL, the way that it's operated, does that hurt someone's stock when we talk about, yeah, you get a lot coming out of the University of Alabama, but they've maximized. Some of these players are a lot closer to their ceiling than they would be if they come from a school that did not prepare their kids as much as Alabama does.
Well, the one thing I tell, when I talk to teams, when I talk to players, agents, the whole deal is that when you draft kids from Alabama, you know what you're getting. You know exactly who they are. You know they've been well coached. They've been trained well. They're going to be physically near their peak, and that's okay, right? You're getting a very solid kid with a low bust factor, but you're not going to get the upside that you might get from like Marcus Davenport, kind of coming from UT San Antonio. You look at that guy and say, well, he's probably never really been coached, and he's probably never worked with a nutritionist and a sports psychologist and a position coach that is one of the best in the entire world at what they do. So it builds this idea that those guys have a little more upside. Now, there's a lot that goes into that if they're ever going to reach it or not. And so it depends a little bit on the situation. I think kids coming out of Alabama right now are a lot more athletic. They have a little more athletic potential than 5-6 years ago. We see guys like, especially in last year's class, like Tim Williams, where it felt like dude's still got a lot of potential in his body and areas where he can get better. And I think there's even some talk last year with a lot of the DBs that they had more potential and more of a ceiling than we were used to seeing from those Alabama guys. But it's that way for a lot of other schools that maybe aren't as successful, like Iowa. You got to get from Iowa, you know exactly what you're getting. And I think that, we'll see Georgia get to that level as well. Notre Dame kids generally don't have a ton of upside, especially O-line, D-line. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse at the same time because you all keep beating everybody and winning all these games. But what comes with that is your players are pretty refined coming out.
So how about the discount when we talk about, or maybe it's an upside, when we talk about not as much, the use. When we talk about, I know Derrick Henry was kind of the outlier with 395 carries in that Heisman campaign, but overall, they split a lot of carries. They don't get as many stats. They don't spend a lot of time on the defensive side of the football because generally they force people 3 and out, so the number's not as inflated as what they would be if you played at a bad team where they get 150 tackles.
Yeah, that's exactly it. We look at someone like Jerron Payne. We're like, oh, why isn't his production very good? Oh, because everyone on that defense is going to play in the NFL. Okay, that explains it. And it's one of those things that I've ranted about this on Twitter and on my podcast that with stats, you just need context. You have to understand, Rashaan Evans is not going to have as many tackles as some kid at BYU, but that's because he's got 10 guys around him who are also attacking the ball. And, if you play Ronnie Harrison is not going to have as many tackles as, some of these other safeties because he's got a lot of guys in front of him who are able to make plays on their own. So I think when you evaluate Alabama guys, you almost have to focus more on traits and not as much on production because whether it's offense or defense, Damian Harris is not going to get the number of carries that Bryce Love is. It's just not going to happen. There's too much talent in that backfield. So you really can't get too caught up in that.
We're talking to Matt Miller, NFL draft scout, BleacherReport.com, also a great podcast host, Stick to Football, a twice weekly podcast there every Wednesday, every Friday. He drops one of those, and you can connect with him, Stick to Football, on the Twitter account and his personal account at NFL Draft Scout. Matt Miller right now from the Bleacher Report. Let me ask you how A.J. McCarron affects this NFL draft. How do you see it happening?
It's huge. It really does because it adds one more viable starter to the market. And it's all about supply versus demand with quarterbacks. These guys get, you start a couple games and you look promising and you end up becoming someone that teams are going to throw a lot of money at. So where he lands is going to send a ripple effect. Same with Kirk Cousins and Case Keenum. Where they land will dictate a lot about how early these quarterbacks come off the board. So, if A.J. McCarron goes to the Browns, they might not feel as pressured to draft Sam Darnold number 1 overall. And I think it's the same if McCarron goes to the Jets or if he goes to the Cardinals. Wherever he might land, that team doesn't have to, really bet the farm on drafting a quarterback early. You probably still want to draft one in the, third round just in case, because you always want to be developing a guy. And we have seen such a limited sample size from AJ, but I think if you're a team that feels like, you could have a Minnesota Vikings type year or with a great defense and a pretty good run game, you'd be able to make something happen and go on a run, then AJ McCarron's a great fit for you. But, we've just seen so little from him since he left Alabama, really. But everything I hear is that the teams love this guy, especially those that have been, working with him in the past, like Hugh Jackson and, Jay Gruden, guys like that really have a lot of respect for AJ McCarron.
When you look at AJ, would you give us some more teams? Because we hear the Cleveland and we kind of cringe, but we want to be obviously we're going to pull for him regardless here in Tuscaloosa. Mm-hmm. But who else do you think might be a good fit for AJ McCarron?
I think the Arizona Cardinals are a great fit. You have Larry Fitzgerald. You have an offensive line that is improving, and they're putting a lot of resources into making better. You have David Johnson coming back from injury, and they're going to have to draft some receivers as well. So you're going to get some young guys at that position. There's also not a quarterback on their roster right now. Carson Palmer retired. Blaine Gabbert and Drew Stanton are both free agents. So if McCarron is going to look at this and say, I want to go somewhere and start. I've been a backup. I've done that. I want to go somewhere and be the man. I think Arizona makes a ton of sense, and they're picking at 15. What are the chances that one of these, starting caliber quarterbacks falls to 15 in the draft? It'd be a pretty big surprise, at least the way everything looks right now. So that stands out to me as the most logical fit for him if he wants to go somewhere and really be, not handed a starting job, but almost promised one of you're going to come into camp and be QB1, and it's going to be a good spot for you. The other one to watch, I think, would be Buffalo. Depending on what they do with Tyrod Taylor, they drafted Nathan Peterman last year, put him in a game, and he threw 5 picks. So they obviously need to figure out the quarterback position and where they're drafting at. They have picks 20 and 21, 21 and 22. They're too far back to get a quarterback, and it's going to cost so much to go up and get one. I could definitely see them, just trying to sit there and say, let's just get a guy who's a little more established. We could put him right onto this team that was a playoff team this year. That was a good football team. You put him in and feel like you can, with your run game, the receivers they have in the defense, they could be pretty good.
Matt, final question, I promise. When we look back 3 years from now, or let's say 5 years from now, which quarterback out of this class has the most success?
I think I'm not trying to dodge your question, I promise. I think so much of that depends on where they're drafted.
Sure.
It's like if Deshaun Watson had been drafted by the Browns instead of the Texans. Well, what would we be saying about him this year? Not the same thing. So the guy I think is best set up for success is Sam Darnold, just in terms of the mental makeup, the character, the toughness, the way he plays the game. But, any of these guys drafted, somewhere like Cleveland, where they've historically not had much success at that position, you automatically feel like the odds are stacked against them, and so, the best spots might be the guy who's the third quarterback off the board, like it was for Deshaun Watson last year. So if I had to bet on one, it would be Sam Darnold, but so much is going to be affected by where they're drafted, who their coach is, who their left tackle is, and what type of system they have moving forward.